The heavy wooden door of Redemption Gulch's only bank creaked open, and Amelia Vance stepped inside. Dust from the street clung to her worn black dress. The fabric had seen better days, just like everything else in her life since Thomas died 3 weeks ago. The bank smelled of leather and tobacco smoke. Polished brass fixtures caught the morning light streaming through tall windows. This place was built to intimidate folks like her, and it worked. Mr. Sterling sat behind his massive oak desk like a king on his throne. His silver pocket watch chain glinted as he looked up from his ledger. The banker's face showed no emotion as Amelia approached. She had rehearsed this moment 100 times on the walk from her cabin, but now her throat felt dry as desert sand. Sterling spoke first, his voice cold as winter wind. "The deadline for your husband's loan payment passed yesterday, Mrs. Vance. The bank will be taking possession of your land by week's end." His words hit her like physical blows, but she stood straight. She had not walked 8 miles in worn boots to give up now. "Please, Mr. Sterling, if you would just listen. Thomas found something on our land before he died. A silver vein, rich and true. I can pay everything we owe and more." The words tumbled out faster than she intended. Sterling leaned back in his leather chair, and then he laughed. Not a kind laugh, but the sort that made her cheeks burn with shame. "A silver mine," he said between chuckles. "Mrs. Vance, every desperate debtor who walks through that door claims to have found gold or silver. Your husband spent 2 years digging holes in worthless rock. Now you expect me to believe that in his final days he suddenly struck it rich? The fantasy of a grieving widow will not change the terms of your contract." Amelia's hand shook, but not from fear, from anger. She reached into her leather satchel and pulled out a folded piece of parchment. Without a word, she walked to Sterling's desk and slapped it down hard enough to make his inkwell jump. The sound echoed through the quiet bank like a gunshot. Sterling's laughter died in his throat as he looked at the map. The parchment was covered in markings, some in charcoal, others in something else. Dark stains, the color of rust, formed symbols and arrows across the yellowed surface. These were not made with ink. The banker's face went pale as he realized what he was looking at. Blood. Human blood. The morning Thomas and Amelia Vance arrived in Redemption Gulch 2 years ago, nobody gave them much chance. They rolled into town on a wagon that looked ready to fall apart, pulled by 2 tired horses. Everything they owned was piled in the back. Pots and pans, mining equipment, and dreams bigger than the mountains surrounding the valley. Thomas was a geologist who had studied rocks and minerals back east before the war. He had books full of drawings and notes about rock formations. Most folks in town could not make heads or tails of his talk about mineral deposits and geological surveys. To them, he was just another fool who thought he could outsmart the mountains and pull fortune from stone. The land they bought sat 15 miles outside town, a massive tract of rough country that 3 previous owners had abandoned. The seller practically danced with joy when Thomas offered to buy it. Everyone knew that land was cursed. No water worth mentioning, no grass for cattle, just rocks and more rocks climbing up into the harsh peaks. Thomas did not care what people said. He saw something in those rocks that others missed. He would spend hours examining stones through his magnifying glass, making notes in his journal. Amelia supported him completely. She tended their small vegetable garden, kept their simple cabin clean, and never complained when dinner was beans and cornbread again. They borrowed heavily from Sterling's bank to buy proper mining equipment: dynamite, picks, shovels, and timber for shaft supports. Sterling was happy to lend them the money at steep interest. He knew he would get their land when they failed, and even worthless land had value to the right buyer. The townspeople watched the Vances with a mixture of pity and amusement. "Poor Amelia," they would whisper, when she came to town for supplies, following that fool husband of hers into certain ruin. Some of the women tried to befriend her, but Amelia kept to herself. She was polite but distant, focused entirely on supporting Thomas in his search. For 2 years, Thomas dug test holes across her property. He would come home covered in rock dust, exhausted but excited about some new formation he had found. Amelia would listen to him talk about quartz veins and fault lines, while she cleaned his cuts and scrapes. She believed in him, even when the money ran low and the loan payments got harder to make. Then came the morning that changed everything. Thomas burst into the cabin at dawn, his eyes wild with excitement. He had been out since before sunrise, following a rock formation he had been studying for weeks. "Amelia," he said, grabbing her hands, I found the signs. The rocks are telling me something. There is a place we have not looked, up near the waterfall in the eastern canyon. They packed supplies for 3 days. Thomas insisted they both go. He wanted her to see what he had discovered. The journey into the eastern part of their land was dangerous. The trail was barely wide enough for one person in places, winding up through loose rocks and steep drops. But Thomas knew these paths like the back of his hand now. They climbed for hours, moving deeper into the canyon than they had ever gone before. Thomas pointed out rock formations as they went, explaining how ancient rivers had carved these channels, how pressure and time had pushed metal deposits up from deep in the earth. His excitement was infectious. Amelia found herself believing completely that this time would be different. The waterfall Thomas mentioned was hidden behind a wall of boulders. You would never find it unless you knew exactly where to look. The water fell 30 feet into a pool surrounded by smooth stone. But Thomas was not interested in the water. He was studying the rock face behind the falling stream, running his hands over the stone. That was when he saw it. A crack in the rock, almost invisible unless the light hit it just right. He wedged his pick into the crack and pried. A section of rock swung inward like a door, revealing a natural cave behind the waterfall. Thomas lit their lantern and they stepped inside. The cave went back 20 feet into the mountain, and there, in the dancing light of the lantern, the walls sparkled. Veins of pure silver ran through the rock like frozen lightning. Not tiny traces, but thick bands of metal that caught the light and threw it back in brilliant flashes. This was not a small find. This was a fortune beyond imagining. Thomas immediately began sketching the cave's location on his map, marking the path they had taken. He used charcoal to note the major landmarks. Every detail had to be perfect, so they could find this place again and bring back the equipment to start mining properly. Amelia watched him work, her heart pounding with the reality of what they had found. They stayed in the cave for an hour, Thomas taking samples and making measurements. Finally, he said they should head back. They needed to be careful. If word got out about this find before they could secure it properly, claim jumpers would swarm their land like locusts. The journey down started well. They were both giddy with excitement, talking about paying off the loan and building a proper house. Thomas was already planning which equipment they would need, how many men to hire. Neither of them saw the loose rock that had shifted during their climb up. Thomas stepped on it wrong. The rock rolled, his ankle twisted, and he fell sideways. Amelia reached for him, but he was already tumbling. He hit a ledge 8 feet down, his leg bending at an angle that made Amelia scream. The crack of breaking bone echoed off the canyon walls. She climbed down to him, her hand shaking. His left leg was badly broken, the bone pressing against the skin. Thomas was conscious, but in terrible pain. They were miles from town, from help, from anything. Blood seeped through his pants where the bone had torn through muscle. Amelia tried to make him comfortable. She used their rope to secure his leg, tore strips from her petticoat for bandages, but she could see in his eyes that he knew the truth. Without proper medical help, with a wound this bad, infection would set in quickly. They both knew he would not make it back to town. Night fell. Amelia built a small fire to keep them warm. Thomas drifted in and out of consciousness, burning with fever. When he was lucid, he talked about the mine, about making sure she could find it again. The map was not detailed enough, he kept saying. The charcoal marks were too thick, too general. She needed exact measurements from the waterfall. As dawn approached, Thomas knew his time was running out. His breathing had become shallow, his skin gray. But his mind was clear for these final moments. He looked at the map, then at his wife. The charcoal would not work for the precise details he needed to add. The entrance to the cave, the exact number of steps from specific rocks. These details would make the difference between finding the fortune and losing it forever. Thomas made a decision that would haunt Amelia for the rest of her days. He pulled out his knife and made a small cut on his arm. Using a thin stick as a pen, he dipped it in his own blood and began adding to the map. The blood made fine, precise lines that the charcoal could never achieve. He marked the exact location of the hidden entrance, the number of paces from 3 different landmarks, the angle of approach needed to see the crack in the rock. "Promise me," he whispered as he worked. "Promise you will claim what we found. Do not let Sterling take our land. Do not let our dream die with me." Amelia held his hand and promised through her tears. As the sun rose over the mountains, painting them gold and red, Thomas Vance drew his last breath. The map was complete, written in charcoal and blood, a final gift from a husband to his wife. Amelia stayed with his body until noon, then began the terrible journey back. It took her 2 days to reach their cabin, dragging herself forward on willpower alone. She buried Thomas behind the house, under the oak tree where they used to sit in the evenings. Then she studied the map. Following the blood-marked directions exactly, she found the cave again. The silver was still there, gleaming in her lantern light, as real as her grief. She chipped off several large samples, chunks of rock with thick veins of pure silver running through them. These would be her proof. Now she stood in Sterling's bank, watching the banker's face change as he understood what the map represented. This was not just a claim of riches. This was a document written by a dying man in his own blood, a testament that could not be faked or dismissed. The bank door opened again. Warren Croft walked in, his expensive suit and gold watch chain marking him as a man of considerable wealth. The railroad tycoon smiled at Sterling like they shared a secret. "Good morning, Sterling. I trust our business regarding the Vance property is nearly concluded." Sterling's eyes darted between the map and Croft. Sweat beaded on his forehead. The situation had just become complicated. He and Croft had made a deal. Sterling would foreclose on the Vance land and sell it to Croft for a fraction of its assumed value. Croft needed that exact land for his new rail spur that would connect the mining camps to the north with the main line. "Mrs. Vance was just leaving," Sterling said quickly, reaching for the map. But Amelia's hand slammed down on it first. "Not quite, Mr. Sterling. We have not finished our business." She reached into her satchel and pulled out 3 rocks, each the size of a fist. She set them on the desk with deliberate care. The rocks were unlike anything typically found in the area. Thick veins of native silver ran through them like frozen rivers, catching the light from every angle. Croft's eyes widened. Sterling's mouth fell open. These were not just ore samples. These were specimens of extraordinary richness. The balance of power in the room shifted like sand in an hourglass. Amelia was no longer a desperate widow begging for mercy. She was standing on a fortune that would make her the wealthiest person in the county. Sterling's mind raced, calculating the profit he could make by financing her mining operation. "Mrs. Vance," Sterling said. His tone completely changed. "Perhaps we should discuss new terms. I believe the bank could be very helpful in developing your mining operation. We could extend your loan, provide capital for equipment and workers." Croft stepped forward, his face red with anger. "Sterling, we had an agreement. You cannot simply break our contract because this woman walks in with some rocks and a bloody map." But Sterling was not listening to Croft anymore. He was looking at those silver veins, seeing the fortune they represented. The Vance mine would need investors, equipment, transportation. His bank could provide all of that for a percentage. This was bigger than any railroad spur. Amelia spoke calmly and clearly. "I will pay Thomas's loan in full, with all interest owed. You will clear the deed to our land immediately. Once that is done, we can discuss future business arrangements. But know this, Mr. Sterling. My husband died to secure this fortune. I will not let anyone take advantage of his sacrifice." Sterling nodded quickly, already pulling out the loan documents. "Of course, Mrs. Vance. The bank is at your service." Croft stormed out, slamming the door hard enough to rattle the windows. His railroad plans were ruined, and everyone in the room knew it. 6 months later, the Vance silver mine was producing more ore than any other mine in the territory. Amelia hired dozens of men from town, paying good wages. She built a proper road to the mine, and contracted with a different railroad company to transport the ore. The cabin where she and Thomas had lived was replaced by a modest but comfortable house. She kept the blood-marked map in a frame above her fireplace. Visitors would sometimes ask about it, and she would tell them the story, how her husband had loved her enough to use his own blood to secure her future. How determination and sacrifice could overcome greed and power. Sterling's bank profited from its association with the mine, but Amelia made sure he never forgot who held the real power. She dealt with him fairly but never warmly. The banker who had laughed at her desperation now jumped when she entered his office. The town of Redemption Gulch grew and prospered because of the Vance mine. New businesses opened, families moved in, and the little frontier town became a proper city. Through it all, Amelia remained focused on honoring Thomas's memory by building something lasting from his sacrifice. If this story of love, determination, and justice inspired you, please hit the like button And subscribe for more tales from the Old West where the underdog wins and greed gets what it deserves. Share your thoughts in the comments about Amelia's incredible journey from desperate widow to mining magnate. What would you have done in her place? Let us know below.